Good afternoon. My name is Farrell, and I'm responsible for customer engagement and communications at Zero Waste Scotland. And I'm absolutely delighted to be hosting this session, the last of the sessions this morning, exploring how we reimagine our circular places. And today I'm delighted that we can welcome three of our long-standing partners in this circular economy journey in Scotland. We have Alison Henderson, who's Chief Exec of the Dundee, Angus and Perth Chambers of Commerce, Carrol Buxton, who's Interim Chief Exec of Highlands Islands Enterprise, and Stuart Patrick, who's the Chief Executive of Glasgow Chamber of Commerce, which is, of course, the host city for COP26. We've heard this morning about circular economy strategies, policies, the exciting news that we've commissioned the first circularity gap report for Scotland, which will allow us to understand where Scotland sits in terms of our circular economy journey, and importantly, allow us to benchmark our progress against the rest of the world. But this opportunity now is to hear from some of these leading thinkers and practitioners of the circular economy in Scotland and hear a wee bit about the journey that their cities and regions have been on. And given he's so comprehensively outnumbered today, I thought we'd start with gentlemen first. And Stuart, would you like to tell us a wee bit about the journey that the city and region of Glasgow's been on?
Surely, will do. Thanks very much, Jill. Good morning, or good afternoon, everybody. We've just crossed into the afternoon. Glasgow Chamber of Commerce, we've been on a long journey ourselves. We are 238 years into our history as an independent business membership organisation. There's the slogan behind me, supporting members and championing Glasgow. But in the last 6 years, we have been tackling issues around the importance of circularity in addressing the growth of the city's economy. We have a specialist team. We set up Circular Glasgow back in 2015 in partnership with our pals at Zero Waste Scotland and at Glasgow City Council. And we've been working very closely with both, including with the City Council through their Sustainable Glasgow Board on the net zero targets by 2030 plan, working on issues around the establishment of Green Business Charter, the Green Print Investment Prospectus that Glasgow City Council launched just last week. And our journey, though, in circularity has been predominantly about working with local businesses. We've worked over the 6 years with, I think we're now over the 800 local businesses that have engaged with us in some form on understanding what the role of circularity might be. And we've established the Circular Glasgow network out of that. We've got 220 members of that network who are there to share their understanding of what circularity means, what they can do as individual companies. And we've also got a set of circular ambassadors. We've got 20 ambassadors from such august organisations as the Royal Bank of Scotland, Edrington's, Scottish Leather Group, St Enoch Centre, who are there to pass on their understanding of how circularity can work for their companies. We carried out a circle scan for the city with circular economy way back at the beginning. It led us into a variety of sectors that we felt were going to be important: manufacturing, construction. These were all very significant to understanding where our circularity gap existed. We don't have a measure of circularity gap at the city level. It's incredibly difficult to do. So we look forward to seeing what the Scottish circularity gap tells us. But that has helped us, the circle scan, the city circle scan has helped us understand what the interaction between various sectors will be. So whilst we might work with individual companies on their circularity plans, we also need to understand and have made efforts to understand the interrelationship between various sectors. And I'll be very happy to talk about a lot more about that as the meeting progresses.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Alison, you represent members from an area that not only has great natural beauty and rural Highland areas, but two cities within the Tayside region with which I'm very familiar. Can you tell us a wee bit about how you've been working with your members and the journey so far in Tayside?
Yeah, absolutely. So a very similar kind of story, and I think background to Stuart and how he's described their relationship. So there's two chambers that sit in our patch. So there's our chamber that looks after Dundee and Angus businesses in that geographic area, and then Perthshire chamber goes all the way from the city all the way north and kind of looks after some of those amazing places like Pitlochry and Dunkeld. And it's been really interesting. I think Circular Tayside was born out of one of the scans of the region reports that Stuart talked about. And sometimes when you get a report like that, it can be difficult to imagine the scope of the opportunity. And I the number £433 million worth of opportunity is embedded in my brain. And I think we've been doing a lot of work to try and get businesses to learn how to unlock that. And that's a mixture of cutting down costs in your business, so thinking about your waste and reducing that so that you don't have as much waste to dispose of, but it's also thinking about how do you make the best out of someone else's waste? How do you make revenue opportunities out of your own waste and others? Or how do you think about designing the change in your business so that you're reducing your waste? And it's been a very swift learning curve for me, going from not really knowing a lot about what circular economy actually meant to trying to help our team understand that at the chamber and also take that to businesses. And a patch like ours has got those cities, so the opportunities of that 433 million go across engineering and manufacturing, construction, which we all know people better than us have tried and not really managed to get through the issues that construction face with trying to turn around circular economy and the problems they've got. But we've also got opportunities like energy and the transition to renewable energy, helping oil and gas companies in Angus try to change what they do. And then food and drink, and 70% of Scotland's produce is grown on our patch. And so that's a challenge. We've got the James Hutton Institute that are doing some amazing things to help with innovation and all of that. But it's also the food and drink waste issue and trying to work with hospitality businesses in all these gorgeous parts of the world to kind of help us as consumers and them as producers of waste just do a better job. So yeah, it's been quite a journey. And the V&A Museum in Dundee's brought us another real opportunity because they've got a business by design team that help businesses look at product design, and they've been really great at helping us bring circular economy into those design sessions. So yeah, we've had a really interesting few years. It's been hugely illuminating, and the scope of the interest from businesses and organisations has been huge.
That's great, Alison. I think language is really important in this. So demystifying the circular economy for businesses, for policymakers, and for citizens, helping people understand that the old linear make, use, dispose is literally not sustainable, and finding ways to explain to people how reuse, how lending, to borrowing things, how sharing things is not only personally but from a commercial perspective actually a really robust way forward. And I was very privileged to be part of the team that I started to work with the V&A in Dundee, and it's just great to see what started as a sort of tourist attraction now becoming something that is helping to drive innovation across Scotland, not just in the Tayside region. Carrol, from an enterprise agency perspective, you have responsibility for economic and social development and growth in an area of Scotland that boasts some of the most astonishing wildernesses, as well as a very fast-growing city in the form of Inverness. Could you give us an overview of what the journey has been like for Highlands and Islands Enterprise and the territory you cover?
Thanks very much, Jill. Yes, I mean, Highlands and Islands Enterprise covers an area stretching from Shetland in the north down to the tip of Argyll and out to the Western Isles and over to Murray. So very diverse region. And as you say, one very fast growing city, Inverness, a number of large towns and a lot of rural communities. Hi as an organisation has a remit for both economic and community development. So we work with a huge range of businesses, communities, social enterprises, and stakeholders across the region. And I think that's something that is very important for us, not, well, in all aspects of our work, but particularly in terms of this issue, the circular economy and, as Alison mentioned, the just transition. So working together, I think, in partnership is absolutely key to address some of these challenges. We're also a region that is very proud of its natural environment and are very dependent on our natural environment for some of our key sectors, food and drink and tourism, for example, and more recently renewable energy. So we want to, we're the custodians of that environment, and we all need to work together to look after it. I think as rural communities, we have a lot of very innovative people, and not maybe innovative in how people generally think about innovation, working with universities and doing very high-tech things in a high-tech way, but just looking at what you're doing and identifying ways of doing it better and in a more productive manner. And we've got some really, really good examples in our region of businesses, social enterprises, communities who have seen a way of just making better use of things that are lying around, basically, and reusing them to benefit others who can make use of them. So I think for me the key things are partnership. We're also a very place-based organisation. We do want to have solutions that work for all our communities, all parts of our region, and we have to take a different approach in some of those areas, how we work together with people or how we support businesses to do things differently.
Oh, that's great, Carol, and I can attest to the circular nature of the islands. I actually have a croft on the Western Isles in Harris, and the concrete front of the garden started to collapse, and I couldn't figure out why, and we discovered that innovatively a van had been used as filler for this concrete platform, and as the van started to rust, the concrete platform started to dissolve. But seriously, the cost of getting things on and off of islands, getting materials to some of the more remote parts of the world, actually that drives circular economy behaviours, because people recognise how expensive it is to then have that removed again. So my crofting neighbours were appalled to discover that there were circular economy thought leaders until I explained to them exactly what that meant. But I think it's very good examples of the circular economy in practice when you go around some of the crofts and some of the more rural communities.
Absolutely. In an island community, the cost of getting things on and off islands can be pretty prohibitive. So if you can use what you've got and what is potentially a waste product for something else, I'm not necessarily advocating old vans, but we've had businesses in our island communities that have used waste glass, for example, by recycling it and using it as a form of aggregate for use in products, building products. So there are lots of really interesting ideas which I think could be developed further.
Absolutely, and I think you've got your famous Beertobeer example in Glasgow, Stuart, where you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, beg your pardon. That was in essence one of the very first things that we did as a demonstration of the potential of circularity, but it was a very practical piece of collaboration between Olds, the bakers, and Jawbrew, the craft brewing company, to create a beer from what would otherwise have been bread that was stale and would otherwise have been thrown away. So I can't deny there was a certain amount of fun to be had in promoting the circular economy with cans of beer with the chamber logo on them. That gave it an extra theatrical appeal. So, but the message was serious, that there are so many opportunities for companies to look at ways in which they can recycle their waste, not just directly within their own processes, but also in collaboration with others who can see the benefits from their waste becoming inputs to their products. So perhaps it felt to some as maybe a gimmick, but to us it felt like a very important part of showing what circular economy meant.
And I think there's something here as well about that systems thinking. So the doing this circular reviews of the cities and regions that we did, I think it was back in 2018, helped to start establish those systems, those networks, so that you could see where the points of collaboration, the points of potentially joining up existed. And while your mic's open, Stuart, can you tell us a wee bit about the big benefits that you see for Glasgow City and region of embracing the circular economy even more vigorously going forward?
Yeah, sure. I guess, there's some very obvious things that we all now understand. Landfill, reducing the amount of waste going into landfill. You may have noticed that we've been debating the challenges in cities of COVID on the rise in waste being spread across our natural environment in our grass verges, in our parks and our streets. And obviously one of the major benefits of very strong circularity thinking is that waste shouldn't be there in the first place. If you were to get to the absolute ideal, that waste wouldn't be finding its way into the public realm. So whether it's landfill, fly tipping, the waste crisis, as we like to describe it at the moment within cities, then these are all areas where there's clear benefit. But actually, there's also considerable benefits in, for example, cities leading the way in setting standards for, say, the building industry. The extent to which you can act as a catalyst as a city council, whether through procurement or through the planning process, for encouraging investments in your city that have a strong circular model, and the extent to which that therefore acts as like in the Porter fashion, Michael Porter model, as a sophisticated customer, driving up the capabilities of your local business base. To be innovative in order to respond to those standards. And I think that is something that I know Glasgow City Council is particularly interested in exploring. Equally, I think the extent to which we can encourage key investments to adopt circularity as opportunities for them to show their competitiveness. Scottish Events Campus has a phase 2 programme that is currently in development and going through the investment process, looking for the investment funds required. But part of that phase 2 is all about making the Scottish Events Campus the most sustainable conference and exhibitions venue in the world. That clearly becomes a competitive advantage when you're pitching for business in the world that we are now in. And so the SEC has been a strong partner of ours throughout in exploring for their particular sector what circularity would mean, but equally their ability to then influence their supply chain through the plans that they have, all building a sense of competitiveness for your business base. And then finally, I think Alison mentioned design, and the V&A, Glasgow has its own history of design, and the Glasgow School of Art is the first design institution in the country back in the 1700s. And I think the extent to which we understand how circularity depends on good design, both in products and for that matter in services, that's something that if we exploit that to its fullest, helps to generate the whole innovation model that we want to see developing in our cities across Scotland. So there you have it. I mean, simple issues around waste management, more dramatic impacts through setting high standards for certain sectors like the construction industry, or as drivers for demand for really strong, effective design.
Absolutely. And, I think it's interesting when you're talking about the design of products. I mean, I don't know how many of us are sitting with one of these in our desk. But this is, that's a classic, that if you could design it so that you get a better memory, a better phone when you needed it and not have to replace the whole unit, And that's down to consumers being more aware and more demanding as consumers. That will start to shift that. And I know a lot of the big tech firms like Intel are looking at how they can repackage, processors more effectively. So that consumer demand change, I think, is going to be key to this. But absolutely, for government, either national or local government, has the opportunity to start to drive some of those requirements through circular procurement principles, then you'll start to see a market creating quite quickly. And, there's certainly appetite from Scottish Government and a lot of the local governments that we're working with to look at that. But like all of these things, it's not straightforward because you start kicking into accounting principles and things that I won't begin to get involved in. Stuart, you're way better qualified than I am to discuss that. Carrol, you mentioned earlier the sort of social and economic role in that Highlands and Islands have. The circular economy presents real opportunities for social inclusion as well as economic development. Could you tell us a wee bit about your experience from Highlands and Islands perspective and where you see the bigger opportunities in the future?
I think I was reflecting on this earlier, and when I think of our journey, I mean at the moment we're seeing one of our key roles, along with you in partnership, is about raising awareness more generally about what the circular economy means and how people can get involved. And I think the social enterprise sector in the Highlands and Islands, I think, has been doing this for a long time, but they probably didn't call it work operating in the circular economy. They were doing good things to help people that maybe needed them most. And we've got organisations like ILM Highland, or who are restoring and reusing electrical equipment. We've got a social enterprise in Murray looking at recycling computer equipment, kind of just like you talked about there with your iPhone, trying to make sure that not everybody has to buy something brand new, and we can make better use of what's already there. And a lot of that comes from individuals who are living and working in communities, just identifying a need in the first instance. But that need can then become a real opportunity for not only solving a real issue in the community, but also for growing that social enterprise to enable it to invest in other things. So I think that's been a really interesting journey, and as I say, there's such a lot of innovation out there in that social enterprise and community sector, and also very, very innovative businesses. But I do think sort of that identification of the need and the raising awareness of what people can do themselves, and again, I think that starts right at a really very early age. I mean, I'm just always so impressed at the moment when you speak to young people about how aware they actually are. And I think for us, another thing is working with our partners to kind of foster that enthusiasm that the younger generation have for actually doing something really positive.
I think that's absolutely true. And one of the areas that we're turning our focus to is behaviour change. And generally, people and businesses, policy leaders want to do the right thing. It's just how do you make that clear what the right thing is, and then how do you make it easy for people to do that? And that goes through from everything from the collection infrastructure for waste through to, as we were rehearsing earlier, how do you design products so that you're absolutely maximising the value from all of the, not only the resources that are invested in that product, but all of the carbon that's been invested in manufacturing and shipping that product. So that's that whole package. Now, Alison, you've been very patient. There's an area of great opportunity in Tayside. Could you share with us some of the areas that you think have greatest potential for impact in the Tayside region?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the more recent developments in our patch is the Michelin Scotland Innovation Park. And that's doing some incredible work. So, you know, for those of you that don't know the kind of story of that, we've had Michelin employing 1,000 people, 850 people making tyres in not the most environmentally friendly way, I guess, and shipping them all over the place. And due to a global business decision, they decided that the factory needed to close. And what's been amazing out of all of that is that the partners really got together, the Scottish Government, the local authority, Michelin themselves, and said, you know, we don't want this to happen. So how do we imagine a new future for that site that creates jobs, that drives innovation in a really incredible way, and encourages, you know, inward investment and the local business community to think differently. And they're doing some incredible work. They're looking at how does the circular economy fit into this, because primarily they're looking at the future of transportation and a lot of electrification there. But they're talking to people that make electric batteries at the moment and saying, how do we use your skills to turn this into an end of life sequence as well, you know, and there's an accelerator program there that's encouraging new entrepreneurs and inward investors into the area to come in and actually think about creating jobs and creating wealth. So that's where I think that the answer is. It's about having the idea, having enough people with enough passion to make it happen, but also then getting the community together, the private sector, the education establishments. You know, we've got the college and our universities that are very, very heavily in amongst this. And, you know, there's a skills academy that will then encourage people to retrain into the sectors that the wealth is being grown in. So it's got to be, you know, using all the partners working really closely together and driving that continuous innovation so that we are thinking about the big problems and how do we solve those on a local scale?
Absolutely. We just launched some work looking at the unintended consequence of everybody jumping into their electric cars. Is how do we make sure that the electric car batteries are designed in such a way that they can be reused and repurposed in the future, so that we don't end up with a massive stock of waste at the end of the day. One of the sort of elephants in the room around the circular economy is the focus on not consuming natural resources or finite resources, of minimizing consumption of new resources. What's your thinking, Stuart, around the squaring the circle between growing an economy, which current economic models are based on gross domestic product calculations, GDP, which is basically how much you consume as an economy, and the circular economy and preserving the Earth's natural resources? Just a wee question for a Tuesday afternoon.
Thanks for that. I mean, I know this is a particularly challenging issue. Actually, I think the word consumption is something that we need to wonder about as well, because if you're an economist, then the word consumption basically means household spending. And one of the things that we don't want to do is drive down household spending. That ultimately will lead to a loss of support, I suspect, for all that we're trying to do. Equally, we've got to appreciate that our levels of consumption in an economic sense are not yet matched by India, China, and other parts of the world that have not shared in the growth of the economy to the same level as we have over the last 200 years. And it's going to be really difficult to suggest to them, I'm afraid you can't have it now, because we've come up with this clever approach to stopping you from raising your consumption levels. Equally, I think those who will say we can only tackle climate change by abolishing the capitalist system and moving to choose your terminology as an alternative. In all honesty, I think that's a clear recipe for never succeeding. We are asking us to do something we've never achieved, we're never likely to achieve, and frankly, I think it will be a waste of our efforts trying to completely reform the system. We've got to try and achieve our end goals here within the system that we have. I think that's got to be a starting point. You're wasting your energy, I think, trying hard to bring down the system. So I then say, well, the one thing about the circular economy, which we've always liked at the Chamber of Commerce, was that that it always actually sat rather nicely between sustainability and being able to run a profitable business, because reduction in resource use always inevitably leads to reduction in cost. So you're inevitably coming to a model that will help you to achieve better profitability. If you're particularly astute about it, the extent to which you think about your products or your services and consider that, particularly in developed countries, the demand for experience rather than stuff is growing, and the extent to which you can exploit that. The most obvious example of that is from our perspective, is the situation in city centres at the moment, where straightforward retail is in decline to a degree, largely because of the shift to online, which I'll come back to in a minute. But the answer coming back from investors in city centres that focused heavily on retail was, actually, we need now to think about shopping as a theatrical experience, where so much more of the value comes from the whole day experience of going into a city centre and doing the shopping, doing the lunch, going to a show in the evening. That kind of demand, the extent that our demand shifts from stuff to experience, is part of a wider story. But of course, the flip side of the decline in retail in city centres is that it's largely shifted online. So it doesn't actually reduce the demand for stuff. And actually online, the worry about, particularly in clothing, for example, what happens to the returns that have been, the huge increase in the number of returns that have been generated by online. That kind of challenge we are not yet tackling. So I think that the answer to the squaring of the circle is a combination of understanding that when we're talking about consumption, we're really talking about consumption of materials. Can we reduce the consumption of materials by reuse? Can we reduce the consumption of materials by product design, service design, rather than saying we don't want you to spend your money? I think that's a clarification that we should all be very thoughtful about.
Yeah, I think it's a really important distinction, and very much around consuming differently, as opposed to simply the message of cutting consumption. And some of my colleagues in Zero Waste Scotland have for some years been renting their jeans, which Wrangler jeans, not genetic code, but they've been involved in that for years. And certainly, I live in the West End of Glasgow, and there's two very high quality, previously loved stores have opened recently, and they seem to be as busy as anything else. So as you say, that combination of an experience around retail for new and different forms of retail, I think presents some potentially very exciting opportunities for city and town centres going forward. Are you seeing similar movements in the Tayside area, Alison?
Yeah, I think we are. I think we're our cities are smaller, and we're definitely seeing that more people are looking for that experience. Definitely. I think people's habits are changing, or at least some people's habits are changing. And I'm intrigued by what is often seen as a generational difference. So, we often hear that young people are more switched on to kind of this consumption or the circular economy side of things. And I think we've got a challenge in bringing that thinking into businesses. And one of the things that Circular Tayside is going to do is launch a Circular Tayside Charter, which is going to help businesses think through different levels of how they, embody circularity in their businesses. So, and at a very basic stage, it's about encouraging staff to ask the questions about their workplace. Do we recycle properly? Do we genuinely think differently? Do I feel like I can challenge our office manager about where we're buying our stationery from, for example? So, I think it's as important for us all to be encouraged to think like that, and think about that from your work perspective, because it's a bit easy to think about recycling at home, isn't it? All of the infrastructure is there for you. But when you then step into your workplace, it can feel a bit more difficult maybe to influence that. And so I think, just changing everybody's thinking and us all becoming just more aware of this. I think my husband would tell you that I've been into slow fashion for a long time, but he probably just thinks that's the level of spend rather than the fact that you know, of what I'm looking. But again, that's another important thing, isn't it? You know, thinking carefully about what we're consuming and encouraging better choices and local choices as well. And that's something that I think Stuart and I would all share. It's about, you know, supporting your independent businesses. You know, it doesn't need to have all those extra miles. In our patch, we've got the most amazing climate positive gin. And, you know, that spawned from a conversation between Abertay University's Food and Drink Innovation Labs, James Hutton Institute and their expertise in agriculture, and a business that had wonky potatoes that was making vodka, and all of a sudden saw a real opportunity. But there's not many people that have that way of thinking that can get the right people together to make it happen. So yeah, it's about thinking, isn't it?
I think though sorry, Joe, just to pick up on that, I totally agree with Alison about local sourcing as much as we can. Although I think there's a flip side to that. If I look at two of the companies that have taken circularity very seriously in our membership, Edrington's, the whisky company, and Scottish Leather Group, and both of them are selling their products on a global basis. And I'd rather not get to a point where we've said, well, we are undermining their ability to maintain their global status. But it's particularly clear that both of them have focused heavily on how to source their inputs at a local level as far as they possibly can. So there's a balance that we have to strike in that argument, I think.
I think that's very true. And, you know, if we think about the circular economy and systems, then it's not just systems within Scotland, it's international systems, and thinking about embedded carbon in everything that we use and buy. That also includes the carbon used to manufacture, sometimes offshore, and the carbon used to transport to our doorstep, sometimes literally. And, you know, certainly some of the thinking just now, apparently a PwC report I saw recently, 93% of employees said their company's environmental performance mattered to them. Now, you could argue that sometimes people will just say that in a survey because it's the right thing to say. But I think 5 years ago, it wouldn't have been anything like 93%. So, you know, to your point, Alison, employees care about this. Legislators care about the environment. So, you know, you've got those two levers of being able to attract and retain the best people, the potential threat of, if we don't get our acts together, then government will start to legislate to drive the changes that we need. But also there are new market opportunities, as you say, Stuart, that companies are identifying. The new environmentally friendly gin, which has escaped my notice, and I will rectify that. I mean, with all of these drivers happening, I think everybody recognises that we need to up our game in terms of the pace of change. Carrol, what do you think would be the key things that would help faster adoption and implementation of circular economy principles in your area or more broadly?
I think one of the key things is about the development of local supply chains. I think that is very important, and we've touched on that already. I mean, and we've got examples of that in the distilling industry, as has already been mentioned. I think if anything, the last kind of 18 months has put more of a focus on local supply chains, not only with the pandemic, but also Brexit. And we've had some really good examples in the food and drink and the hospitality industries of people just looking differently at how they can source their inputs, as Stuart said, where they're coming from, and how that can be not only more sustainable, but can be more cost effective if you're not transporting things for long distances. So I think in terms of just helping people to look at how they're sourcing, where they're getting their inputs from, is something that we're keen to talk to our business and communities about, and look at different ways of doing that. I'm also looking at different types of input, and again, maybe going to the slightly more scientific end. We've got quite a lot of work going on in this area with natural resources like seaweed and algae, and how those can be used as substitutes for other materials to make things from alternatives to plastics. to filters, to it's just forms of fuel as well. So I think it's looking at things differently, and again that look just looking at what you've got more available on your doorstep. I think the whole issue of clothing is really interesting too. I'm not saying how old I am, but I don't ever remember when I was at school having things like uniform swaps, and
Yep.
I think that's great now, and they're spreading across the country, and why not? It's a great idea.
It used to happen informally in our village for people would just pass on the blazers because they're heck of inexpensive.
Yes, that's good if you've got cousins that are bigger than you, isn't it? But and all these examples, and some of them don't need to be, as I say, high tech or fancy. There's quite a lot of common sense.
As you say, it's changing behaviours and helping people to think these things through. We've only got a couple of minutes before we hear from our colleagues in Catalonia about the experience of their experience of adopting the circular economy in Catalonia. So just like to ask you each, do you have one silver bullet that you think could help with the pace of change in adopting the circular economy and realising those opportunities in Scotland? And if so, what do you think that would be, Alison? The poster girl of slow fashion, as you're going to be known from now on.
Oh, heck.
No pressure.
I think it's got to be positive reinforcement in some way. So, we've talked about, we've got circular ambassadors as Stuart does in Glasgow. We are going to be encouraging businesses to take up the charter and use that as a not just a badge of pride, but to show that they have embedded circularity into their business model. And I think I'd like to see that then go into the buying behaviour, so of public sector and of our larger organisations that can really make a difference. Because if we can sustain businesses, grow businesses and create jobs, then that's got to be something that we'd all be very proud of, I would say.
Absolutely. Stuart.
I'm not a great fan of silver bullets, but if I was to choose something where I'd say, gosh, it'd be really interesting to see this develop, it would be circular buildings. It would be really interesting. We had a couple of sessions between the construction industry and the finance industry with input from colleagues in Amsterdam, ABN AMRO in particular, explaining their experience of building a circular building, and how much there's a green premium involved in building on a circular basis, how we drive that down through innovation and through government support. I think that's one of the areas I think would be one of the most exciting.
Absolutely. The opportunities, and we're seeing investment attitudes changing in construction, where people are actually thinking about the whole life cost of the building, including what do you do with it when it's no longer serving a useful purpose, what's the cost of deconstruction, and then getting rid of that waste. And when buildings start to be valued on that basis, then that's when you'll start to see a lot of the shift in changing behaviours. And in a very small level, from an investment perspective, it's hard to remember having such a lovely chat here that there's actually an audience watching this. So it's just to let people know, if you're inspired to action in the circular economy and you run a social enterprise, Zero Waste Scotland is going to be launching a new fund with Social Investment Scotland very soon for social enterprises, focused on the circular economy, of course. So hopefully this will generate some interest in new social enterprises or existing social enterprises adapting circular economy principles. But can I just take this chance to thank Alison, Carrol and Stuart so much for your time, but more importantly for your thought, your insight and your candour on this matter. Scotland has great things to shout about from a circular economy perspective. And I know that we'll all be hoarse by the middle of November with all the shouting that we'll be doing over the COP26 period. So thank you very much. And we're now going to launch a video from our colleagues in Catalonia telling us about their experience. Bye-bye.